World of Warfare presents Failed Weapons of World War II. Designed to penetrate concrete bunkers and beach defenses along Hitler's Atlantic Wall, the 10-foot-tall Panjandrum consisted of two rocket-propelled wheels joined by an axle filled with high explosives. Built by Britain's Directorate of Miscellaneous Weapons Development and named after a bit of 18th century nonsensical prose, tests in 1943 and 44 exposed a myriad of dangerous problems, including wheel and rocket detachments and runaway target paths, causing Allied war leaders to refocus their D-Day invasion plans on sheer troop strength alone. Hitler's V-3 supercannon was another failed weapon, designed to bombard London from an underground bunker some 100 miles away along the coast of northern France. Employing a battery of 25 gun tubes sunk into a fortified bunker, each tube of the V-3 used a sequence of secondary firing charges to accelerate a shell up to the necessary velocity required for its 100-mile flight, with an intended payload output of some 600 shells an hour. Thanks to a relentless Allied bombing campaign, the V-3 was knocked out of service on July 6, 1944, before a single shell could be fired at the British capital. Another misconceived weapon was Germany's Krumlauf curved barrel rifle, designed to fire around corners or over the top hatch of a tank, with the goal of safely eliminating enemy combatants without exposure to retaliatory gunfire. Once in use, soldiers soon discovered that the barrel quickly distorted or shattered due to a bullet's inherent velocity, leaving both bullets and bodies shattered by explosive force. Last but not least was the Maginot Line, which was constructed by the French in response to Germany's defiant rearmament after the Treaty of Versailles forbade them to do so. Built between 1929 and 1939, the Maginot Line consisted of a network of fortresses, bunkers, obstacles, and artillery batteries along the connected borders of France, Germany, Luxembourg, and Switzerland, a place where French military planners hoped to concentrate their limited number of troops against an anticipated German invasion through Belgium. After the Nazis lived up to French expectations in May of 1940, the Germans bypassed the Maginot Line for an advance through France's undefended Ardennes forest, making ill-conceived weapons of World War II some of the worst blunders in military history. Designed to engage high-altitude Allied bombers over Germany, the Messerschmitt Me-163 Comet was the world's first and only rocket-powered fighter during the Second World War, employing a mix of two volatile liquid propellants that could accelerate a comet to 39,000 feet in a mind-blowing 3.45 minutes. Placed into service in May of 1944, the Comet's inability to slow down from its top speed of 550 miles an hour proved too fast for Luftwaffe pilots to inflict much damage on slow-moving bombers such as the B-24 Liberator, the B-17 Flying Fortress, and the B-25 Mitchell, while the Comet's 7-minute burn time obliged pilots to glide back to base for a dead-stick landing. Of the 363 Comets built, the rocket plane was credited with dropping 16 heavy bombers at a loss of 13 or more of their own. A second failed warbird was the two-seat Boulton-Paul Defiant, or Daffy, which entered RAF service in December of 1939. Armed with 4 .303-inch machine guns on a power-operated turret behind the pilot, the Defiant's intended use was designed to attack unescorted bombers from beside or below inbound formations, allowing gunners to pour fire into their intended targets. However, the Defiant's ungainly weight and lack of forward firepower made the aircraft immensely vulnerable to conventional enemy fighters, especially after the development of long-range fighter escorts such as the P-51 Mustang, which could protect heavy bomber formations to and from their intended targets. Suffering heavy losses at the Battle of Britain, the Defiant found later success as a night fighter during the Blitz, before being retired to training duties near the end of the war. A third failed warbird was the Nazis' wastefully expensive V-2 Revenge rocket, which proved to be the Germans' most advanced weapon of World War II. First deployed in the fall of 1944, the massive ballistic missile carried a 1-ton warhead controlled by rudder fins and 2 gyroscopes, reaching the edge of space at supersonic speed before dropping dead stick over Allied cities such as London, Paris, and Antwerp. And while the weapon rained psychological terror upon civilians and military alike, of the 3,000 V-2s fired at Allied cities, the weapon proved far less lethal than the destructive payload of a single raid by the RAF Bomber Command, making failed warbirds of World War II some of the worst misconceptions of early mechanized warfare. After tanks made their debut during World War I's Battle of the Somme, specialization soon refined tank design into light tanks for reconnaissance, heavily armored tanks for frontal assaults on a battlefield, and fast cruiser tanks to exploit salients or bulges in an enemy's frontline defenses. But as tank designs continued to evolve during the Second World War, massive failures plagued war designers on both sides of the conflict. First and most notable was Ferdinand Porsche's monstrosity nicknamed the Maus in English or Maus in German, in response to Adolf Hitler's call for an indestructible super tank, which weighed in at over 200 tons, compared to 68.5 tons for Germany's king of the battlefield, the Tiger II. After trials commenced in 1943, the Maus developed constant drivetrain problems, with a mere 12 miles per hour top speed due to its nearly 10-inch thick armor. Only 2 prototypes were built before the misconceived behemoth was finally scrapped. Great Britain took second place in tank development fails with its Covenanter cruiser tank, which looked promising during its 1939 design phase with its oversized wheels, low profile, and sleek armored lines. By the time it was ready for combat in 1941, its armament and light armor protection proved insufficient against enemy tanks of the Axis forces, while engine cooling problems made it unsustainable for effective use on the battlefield. Of the 1,771 Covenanter tanks produced, none was deployed in combat, instead finding their only role in training new tank crews. Last on the tank fail list was Britain's second and third strike, known as the TOG 1 and 2, which was the creation of the so-called old gang of tank designers left over from World War I. Ignoring nearly every modern development in tank design, firepower, and armor defenses, the old gang instead designed a machine to refight the First World War, producing the TOG 1, which was long, heavily armored, and capable of crossing trenches and bomb-cratered terrain no longer predominant in battlefield etiquette. Its steering and transmission systems proved to be unnecessarily complex and prone to breakdown. The TOG 2 was to follow, including a revolving turret and other much-needed improvements. However, both prototypes proved too awkward and overly complicated to be green-lighted for combat by Great Britain's War Office, making misconceived tank fails of World War II some of the biggest blunders in the age of mechanized warfare.